All right, y'all. So welcome to another episode of Full Circle Podcast. It is your favorite brother, Joseph, as always. And today we're going to get into a lot of different things. I would say primarily it is one topic that we are going to get into, specifically surrounding that of Donald Trump's time in office so far, all the policies and all of the actions that have been taken, and the impacts that is currently having in the American social, political, and economic environment. So we're going to get into that today. Before we do that, though, if you have been listening to our podcast, if you've been watching, I just want to say thank you so much for the time that you have taken to share this with a friend, as well as listening. If you have not, right? If you've been listening to this and for some reason you've just thought to yourself, man, like that's a great episode, and then you skip to something else, right? All you have to do right now in this moment, hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, literally wherever you get your podcasts. Go ahead and, give us a follow. Share this with a friend. As I always say at the start of every episode, it is free to support a nigga unless you want to do more. And once again, thank you so much for your support. Before I get into that, yes, if you're watching this right now, I did sprain both of my fingers, okay? I was playing basketball. My buddy John, his birthday was last week, Monday. So shout out to John. But he's also the one that was contributed to spraining my finger. But, we were playing some competitive ball. Things happen, of course. And so that is why my fingers are right now, wrapped in these splints. So hoping that they're better. Thank God they're not broken. But yeah, that's the story behind that. It's a lot better than, like falling over yourself and tripping and doing that on ice or something like that. But that is a true story. So with that being said, before we dive into this, last time I talked to y'all a little bit, as you know, I'm a very, very big NBA fan. My Warriors are no longer in the running as of a couple weeks ago. That was very, very sad for me, I have to say. But I will say right now, so far, what it looks like, some of the predictions that I made, most of them happened and came true. Some of them did not. And so right now we are up to the finals with the Pacers and the Oklahoma City Thunder in the finals. So this is going to be exciting. These are fresh. They're young. They're new teams. We'll keep an eye on that. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the coming episodes. Also, on top of that, the much-awaited Sinners episode, the conversation, I promise you, it is coming this week. It is coming this week. We've been working on it. It was a lot of footage and wanted to get that out there for y'all, but wanted to do it in the right way. And so my editor has been, between travel and working, has been doing all that. And we've been working closely to give you guys a really good conversation. So thanks for your patience on that. Promise that's coming. All right. So let's hop directly into the episode here. What the hell has been going on in the United States? Well, that's a question that I have been getting from people all over the world. A lot of my friends that live in different countries, ever since January 20th of this year, have been asking me what exactly is going on. Now, I've told you guys several times, right? And I'll just restate it here in case anybody chooses to selectively or accidentally forget, right? I am neither a Republican or a Democrat, right? I am an independent. So whatever I see, I'm going to call it like I see it. If I see something that's good that this administration does, I'm going to call it out. If I see something bad this administration does, I'm going to call it out. Same with the Democrats, right? Whoever is in power, that's what you are going to get from me, right? However, there has been a major shift in the political, social, and economic climate in our country in terms of confidence, stability, truth-telling, and otherwise a level of just what seems to be competence, right? And that's what we're going to dive into in our conversation today, because you can take actions that are designed to change policies and leave your mark as a leader or an administration in the country. There's nothing wrong with that. But we do have to talk about the impact that has on the country, on people, on the economy, and on the overall ability for everybody to not only understand what's happening here, but to have conversations about providing solutions to our everyday problems, right? So let's just start with what we're looking at here. As of today, June 3rd, which you'll probably be getting this tomorrow, June 4th, Donald Trump has been president of the United States for 135 days, okay? Now, that might sound crazy to you because it's felt like, to me, and a lot of people that I've spoken to, with all the actions that have been taken, it has felt like to me that it's been closer to a year or a year and a half since this man has been president, right? And so what I want to do is just go through some of the things that have happened over the last 135 days, from tariffs all the way to the economy, and foreign policy actions as well. So, of course, the Trump administration, one thing that I do have to say, this may not necessarily be considered a positive in terms of actual actions, but in terms of, you know, the foundational aspect of a promise being made and being kept, Donald Trump has kept his promise. He said he was going to begin the immediate deportation of people that are undocumented. He has done that, and aggressively, whether without cause or not. We talked about the immigration debacle that has been occurring. That episode is already up. There's part 1 and part 2. There's the immigration. There's 2 immigration episodes under the Welcome to America, the Immigration Paradox. So you can go listen to those for more details on that. But Donald Trump has issued a incredible amount of executive orders. And the crazy thing about it is, and I actually have a little chart here, Donald Trump has signed more executive orders in the first 100 days of his presidency than any other president, either ever or in recent history. From everything I can see here is from 1933 with Franklin Roosevelt all the way up. At the time, the person who had signed the most executive orders before him was Joe Biden with 42 in his term. Now, what's crazy about this is Donald Trump has signed 142 executive orders ever since January 20th. What is confusing to people like myself and others is that Donald Trump has power in the House and also in the Senate. So the question then becomes, why the need to issue all of these executive orders when you are fully capable of, in your first 2 years of being in office, of course, before the midterms, depending on what happens, why not just go through Congress to pass these actions, right? When an executive order in so many ways is instantaneous in its action, but in many ways it can be easily overturned, which is part of a legacy. So that's the first part. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what some of these policies look like, here's a couple that are pretty outstanding. The first is Executive Order 14151, and that is DEI programs eliminated. So basically what this executive order does is that it terminates all federal diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So as I mentioned before, one thing that I can say, he definitely did as he promised. But just because you do something that you promised doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to be fruitful or beneficial. So let me explain what that looks like. That looks like the cancellation of federal racial sensitivity and anti-bias trainings in every agency. That looks like the end of LGBTQ workplace inclusion efforts that are either federally funded, or mandated. It looks like the elimination of targeted grants, which support equity in education, public service, and contracting. And hundreds of DEI officers and staff were laid off nationwide, dismantling infrastructure that was built over decades, specifically, during the Obama years and onward. Why this is problematic is because of the fact that, yes, I can say this for a fact. Let me bring a little bit of balance here to those that are listening. When you hear the words DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of people think, okay, this stuff was kind of getting out of hand in some way. There were some people, which of course they call it the woke ideology or whatever, which the term stay woke was not a bad term. That word just means to stay aware, like know what's going on, like don't get caught asleep, right? So the whole point of DEI was to ensure that people that were either Black, that were Latino, that were of the LGBTQ community, Asian, American, Pacific Islander, etc., that they were included in the conversation. And largely, these programs would have been unnecessary if the United States in previous years had actually offered the same level of opportunity, equity, and diversity appreciation that it should have all along. Essentially, you had a situation where if you were Black and if you were like Latino, if you were Asian, or if you were part of the LGBTQ community, you were left out and in many ways excluded from the process of either hiring, from the process of expression, from the process of inclusion in the federal workforce and also just in the cultural workforce, right? Or the corporate workforce. And so DEI programs were ensured or were established to ensure that there would be more inclusion from everybody that represents this country, which should not be a bad thing. Now, there have been some people that have taken it really, really far, and it has gotten to such a point that the voices of a few that have taken some of this narrative really far have clouded out the perspective, the valid need for inclusion in the many. And so what has happened is these arguments, these issues, the whole DEI situation is not largely affecting the grand scheme of things. It's not affecting everyone's ability to get a job. And what I mean by that is the whole woke, quote unquote, ideology, that the extreme of it, at least, it's not affecting white people's ability to live their lives and get a job. It's not affecting government's ability to do their functions. It's not affecting that at a large scale. However, what has now happened is there has been this is largely a culture war. There has been a large outcry, specifically in many conservative circles. I'm not saying it's not gotten out of hand in some ways, but in many conservative circles, there are culture war topics such as the trans athlete thing, men playing in women's sports. We'll get to that in a little bit. And what these small narratives, these small stories end up getting blown out of proportion to appear to be a larger problem than what it really is, which then leads to the inaction of these types of policies. So that's something to keep in mind. What the problem with this then becomes, on top of just the culture war aspect and the removal of these programs that incentivize allowing other people of different races, sexual orientations, and of course cultures to be included, this does not help the current state of representation in our country. Because the more that we're going on right now in our society, there are more people of color, there are more women that are being, integrated or not even really integrated, but just involved in the workforce. And they're involved not just in the workforce, but in the cultural backbone, in the population backbone of our country. And so for a lot of people, this in many ways feels racially targeted, it feels gender targeted, and it also feels sexual orientation targeted. A study, including one from the Brookings Institution, demonstrated that DEI programs have actually helped to improve workforce retention, innovation, and educational outcomes because it allows people to not only feel like they are seen and included and heard, but it actually takes them seriously. It takes their voice and it takes their thoughts and it takes their background culturally seriously. And it is more sensitive to that. That does not make us worse as a country. That makes us better. But the problem with this is now, this is not just going and reaching into the federal government's workforce aspect. This is also now reaching into education sectors where students that are part of groups like Latinos Unidos or Black Student Union or different women's groups, they are now targeting these schools and saying, if you have these programs that in any way look like diversity, equity, and inclusion, we will cut funding to you. Imagine what that does. When I was going to my 2-year college, I was part of a Black student union. and I was part of Latinos Unidos. I went to Pride meetings. Of course, I was student president at the time, so some of these meetings I was part of because I wanted to know more about what was happening. But I knew these people. I connected with them. Their stories were real. And the need to feel seen and feel like you belong in a space where you knew that somebody cared about what was going on in your life. They looked like you, but they also shared your stories, and they could really feel part of your personal experience. That mattered, and it still matters. And so the question I want to ask y'all today is, what is this saying about how we view the future? We're claiming to be in this colorblind society in which none of these issues exist. But if that's the case, then why is it important to get rid of the recognition and the appreciation for different cultures, different sexual orientations, different identities? And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to act and promote and go to the extremes of some of the stuff I see on Twitter or X or whatever. But it does mean that we don't eliminate and block out people just because of the fact that we disagree with certain aspects of the way that things are going. We can criticize them, we can call them out on the carpet, but to eliminate them, something that largely enriches society, does not make sense. And like I said before, this removes critical support and opportunity pipelines. And it really diminishes some of the conversations that need to be had about the way this country has been and still is in many ways towards people of color, people that are of the LGBTQ community, and women. And that's something that we have to talk about because that's problematic, because we should be moving forward in these conversations, challenging things that don't make sense. I'm all for challenging the status quo and certain things that don't make sense. I'm open to that conversation. But to basically say that this doesn't matter, so we're just going to eliminate it due to discomfort, no, not okay. It's not all right. So that's something that we'll keep an eye on. And just to tap on this for a second, this whole narrative about being colorblind, see the point, I've heard a lot of people say this, I'm colorblind. The point was never to be colorblind. The point was never to be colorblind and unaware of that. The point was to appreciate color in all of its different beautiful forms, textures, and appearances. To appreciate culture. To know that this land and this American experiment did not come to be because of the hands of just white men. But that every man, every woman, every child, no matter their race, their culture, their creed, their sexual orientation, they matter and should be appreciated. So no, colorblind is not the answer. Because we weren't supposed to ignore the color anyway. It should not be the only thing that matters, but it matters. It matters. Moving on. Tariff policies. During this time, within these last 135 days, the Trump administration reinstated their tariffs, and they targeted specific trade partners such as China, Mexico, Canada, and the European Union. So these three different countries and this one particular organization, which is kind of like a conglomerate, an economic conglomerate block of countries, has now faced increased tariffs on everything from steel to aluminum, electronics, cars, and even food commodities. The Trump administration is basically saying that this will protect American jobs. It'll revive manufacturing sections or sectors over decades that have been decimated. But the problem with this is that, well, I'll say this first. Trump has even claimed that the United States was the richest that it ever was back when we had tariffs. And then, of course, we instituted the income tax. The ignorance behind that statement is we didn't have public schools during that time. We were not as big as we are. We didn't have as many corporations. We did not have as many economic trade involvements. We were not getting goods. Corporations were not taking goods from other countries or trading for goods with other countries for cheap labor. So that was all done to decrease the cost of goods. And of course, I talked about this in a little snippet that I posted on TikTok, that Trump has talked about, we have a trade deficit. We have a trade deficit. We have a trade deficit. Sometimes a trade deficit is not a bad thing. The United States, we've been running on a trade deficit for a while now. But a lot of people still believe, hopefully they still do, that the United States is a country worth investing in. So you can run on a trade deficit, but because you're doing business with them and they actually are making product for you and you're trading dollars for product, they can then turn around and have an interest in reinvesting into your country the dollars. Look at Japan. Just go do some research. As I said in that video, go do some research about the Japanese trade surplus in the 1990s, but how much of a disaster the economy was. Here's what the data says on this particular issue here, okay? So we'll go into this a little bit. The retaliatory tariffs that the United States, or that have been pushed from Trump, because remember, a tariff is a import tax on goods coming into your country, okay? Prices on consumer goods have surged. Washing machines, cars, soon to be smartphones, because Trump is basically demanding now that Apple make their products in the United States, and groceries have become more notably expensive. Retaliatory tariffs have hit the United States agricultural exports hard. Soybean and pork exports to China have now dropped over 30% in the first quarter of this year alone. And this is now devastating farmers in the Midwest and the South. And furthermore, small businesses that have relied on imported goods are facing higher cost, disrupted supply chains, and now all of these costs are being passed on to consumers at the grocery store, at the supermarket, when you're purchasing things online, even on Amazon. There was a whole thing where they were talking about, Amazon was talking about highlighting, or there was some word that came out. They were talking about highlighting certain products that were tariffed. And the Trump administration came out and was like, don't do that. Walmart is being told to eat the tariffs. They're being told to do that. Apple, as I mentioned a couple of moments ago, is being told, make your products in the United States. All of that is going to lead to increased cost. How is this good for the economy? The Dow, the NASDAQ, all of the markets have gone through drops and rebounds. And the reason of this is because in the short-term economy, which many business owners and employers make decisions about, they make decisions forecasting into the future about, they don't have confidence that the United States economy is going to benefit from this. The reason I'm concerned about tariffs is the last time that we had a president that took these steps with tariffs was Herbert Hoover in the 1930s. And this is looking eerily similar to Herbert Hoover's policies in the 1930s, only this seems to be a bit more aggressive. Why this is problematic is because if we end up in some sort of an economic crash or collapse, what ended up happening with Hoover's tariffs is that they deepened the Great Depression. And that was why social programs ended up being needed in the first place with the New Deal policies of Franklin Roosevelt, because the tariffs actually hurt the American consumer who was already struggling financially. Right now, 1% of America's population, which are the richest people, own most of the wealth. Anywhere from, I believe, 1 to 5%. The American worker is they are overtaxed emotionally, they are overtaxed with workload, and they are not making enough money. Wages are not going up for them to be able to afford what already exists, just housing even. So how is this going to benefit the average working person, you and me, in this economy? How is it going to happen? So far, it looks chaotic. The Trump administration has paused tariffs. They've reenacted tariffs. And some people have said, oh, this is just a negotiation way to get what you want. Well, none of the parameters have really changed. None of the agreements have really changed between us and other countries. And this is still hurting the American worker and consumer. So you be the judge. You tell me. What do you think about this? Moving forward, immigration policy. Of course, we talked about this before, but now there is a signature campaign called Project Homecoming, and this has dramatically intensified immigration enforcement. There have been significant ICE raids that have increased 40% since the beginning of Trump's term, and they are focusing on undocumented workers in agriculture, construction, and hospitality. What that is creating now, that's creating a gap in the workforce, which now in Florida, there's even a study. They're considering potentially rolling back some child labor laws to fill gaps in the workforce in agriculture. This is going to create delays in construction projects rolling through. This might even increase the cost of agriculture at the store. And this is affecting the hospitality industry as well. Deportations have surged with over 150,000 removals in 135 days. And now they are introducing a $1,000 incentive program to undocumented immigrants who voluntarily self-deport. Now, the critics of this campaign have said this is a terrible approach because of the fact that it's coercive, and it also does not just target people that are just here illegally, in the sense that they're here illegally and they're hiding from government officials. This also targets people that are seeking asylum, which, by the way, you have to be in the United States to seek asylum. So you may not even have papers yet, but you have to be in the United States to seek asylum. We went into some more detail on that on the immigration episode. Please go listen to it, because that will help with this. But they're targeting not only people that, because they said it was about criminals. They said we had all these gangs and drug dealers and people coming from insane asylums and all this other stuff, which is not even true. That's not even the primary amount of people that are coming here. Most people that end up coming here end up overstaying their visas. And this really pisses me off, because this impacts real people and it impacts their livelihood. But it's people you have already escaping a life and conditions that are terrible and hard. And they're seeking asylum, even if they have temporary protected status. The Trump administration has been talking about rolling back temporary protected status, which is still legal. And to deport somebody, they have to have a deportation hearing, where a judge then says they must be deported. Kilmar Abrego Garcia's story is a perfect example of this. There are people that said he was part of a gang. That's not even true. But even if he was, he would have to be heard by a judge. And then a judge would have to determine, based off of the law, if that can happen. So what we should be focusing on is hiring more judges. We should be focusing on making the immigration process simpler. We should be focusing on, don't get me wrong, get rid of criminals. Get rid of people that are committing egregious crimes. But to make this the whole focus of immigration, it's criminal, it's wrong, and it's inhumane. There's also talk about trying to deport American criminals to places in El Salvador. And the Trump administration has ignored judges' orders to return people that are being sent to Venezuela back to the United States because they were deported illegally. A 2-year-old child that had cancer was deported. And the Trump administration has violated that order to return the child back. So we're seeing a lot of extremes here. And the question then becomes, at what point do we enact the law with justice, but also with a sense of dignity and of grace and in good conscience? Because that seems to be missing from the narrative here. To continue on, we've had now labor shortages, as I mentioned. It's leading to unharvested crops and delayed food production. Construction progress in multiple states are getting delayed, as well as having to hire American citizens or American workers. This is going to now push housing prices even higher. And now hospitality and service industries are reporting now 25% understaffing, which is resulting in longer wait times and lower service quality. So this is going to disrupt productivity in 3 different industries. But with that then comes the inflation of prices, which means that there might be less quality of service being done, more expensive cost. But of course, this administration is more concerned with not even per se results, because to truly lead and look at something, you have to be able to say, okay, wait a minute, does what I'm doing make sense? Or is what I'm doing working? But Donald Trump and this administration seem to be obsessed with never being wrong and always looking right to whatever end. And that is what we're seeing on this particular end here. Moving forward, there has been a rollback of transgender protections. Under this administration, transgender students are no longer protected from discrimination in public schools, which is a reversal of Obama-era guidelines, especially Title IX. Transgender individuals are now banned from military service. There's no clear timeline for the reversal of this. These policy rollbacks are now being met with protests and lawsuits, but the administration is remaining firm on their stance. On top of this, they have centralized control over the Department of Justice and other federal agencies. Press restrictions are getting intensified, limiting transparency and critical journalism. This doesn't necessarily mean that some member of the press has done anything wrong, that they're insulting the president, but it's just simply over disagreements. So, for example, the Trump administration renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, which is so asinine and so childish. But the issue with this is, and you really think about it, the Gulf of America. America is not just one country. America is it is an involvement of North America, Central America, South America. So the Gulf of Mexico, they call it the Gulf of Mexico because it is in between Mexico and the United States. So to call it the Gulf of America, thinking that it's about the United States of America, is so ignorant and it's so asinine. It's really childish and pointless. But the Associated Press, a journalist from the Associated Press, when asking a question, called it the Gulf of Mexico and had their press badge removed. Think about how asinine and childish that is. We can have disagreements, but to take away somebody's credentials because of a disagreement, or because they're asking you questions that you don't like, or to call something wasteful because you don't like how it's being used, it makes no sense. And it feels very authoritarian in nature and should concern everybody who cares, even if you are on the Republican side of things or the conservative side of things. Even if you are a MAGA fan, it should concern you that this is the direction the country is going in. What's happening now, those that are within the administration that disagree with policy directives or even criticize the president, even in the softest of fashions, are facing either demotion or dismissal. And this consolidation of power is now raising serious questions about the independence of law enforcement and the importance of the rule of law. Now, if you want to know more about this stuff, you can go look right now at the White House Executive Order Archives, the Brookings Institution Report on DEI, Reuters and Wall Street Journal tariff reports from Q1, PBS Frontline ICE Enforcement Analysis, which even the Trump administration wants to get rid of funding to NPR and PBS. Unbelievable. The Human Rights Campaign on Transgender Policy, and the New York Times investigation on DOJ control. Now, that's just talking about executive orders That's not talking about foreign policy, and we're going to get into that right now. Domestic policy has been a huge conversation of this administration, but the Trump administration has been involved now in foreign policy. The situation in Ukraine, in which Trump said that before he even took power, he would end the war. That then turned into before he was inaugurated. That then turned into within 2 weeks. That then turned into within 100 days. And now, still, nothing has been solved. The war in Ukraine is continuing to draw support from most people here in the United States, as well as the administration, but it's getting very strongly mixed messages. The first part of this, Trump has criticized the Ukrainian government, specifically Zelensky, for starting the war because of trying to join NATO. But Zelensky was only trying to join NATO because the Ukrainian country has stood alone in many ways before this war as their own power trying to defend their sovereignty. And Putin and his desire to see the USSR reunited does not see Ukraine as a sovereign country. Trump has lauded Putin, has spoken positively about him, has said they have a great relationship, pretty much said he wishes that people would, treat him in the United States the way that they treat Xi Jinping and Putin. And basically all of the negotiations have been, in many ways, to Putin's favor. The conversations that have come from the administration. Putin is being looked at. This is the first time I ever thought in my life I would see an American president talk about Russia as if they were the victim in this situation, especially given the foreign policy. I mean, I think Ronald Reagan would be rolling over in his grave right now, especially with all the work that he did to take apart the Soviet Union. A huge part of this came to a head when Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, came to visit the White House and was berated by Trump and by Vice President Vance during a meeting. And basically they said, you don't have the cards. When you do what we tell you to do, you start getting cards. You should be thankful. And in no way did that seem to appear to be a sign of unthankfulness and ungratefulness, but it was him expressing the credible threat that Russia is posing. And what Trump thought and what the MAGA followers thought was a sign of strength. It was embarrassing to the United States. It was embarrassing to the precedent of foreign policy that has been established. Just embarrassing to watch the president berate an ally of ours and act like they're just money grubbing, act like they're just aid grubbing. When every person, even military personnel that has served over there and that has helped to supply intelligence and resources, knows the grave nature of that situation. This has led to the United States taking a back seat, where it looks like Europe and different allies that agree that Ukraine should be a sovereign nation are taking more of a front seat on this position. And the administration has now fluctuated between strong support and cautious restraint, which is confusing allies. And now, after Trump has said that they need to work it out and they're taking a step back from it, now Trump the other day was calling Putin crazy, as if this was some surprise. So we're not looking very strong on that point. But what this is doing, this is going to make Russia, I believe, more emboldened in their aggression, because Russia just the other day, while claiming to be talking about peace, initiated major and multiple drone strikes in Ukraine. This is crazy. But it doesn't stop there. In Iran, there are new sanctions that are being talked about targeting Iran's oil exports, and military sectors have now been imposed. They're stalling negotiations on nuclear arms control. Of course, the Iranian economy is suffering, but regional tensions are rising, especially with what's going on with Israel. And of course, Israel bombing some of Iran's sites in what was a very, very public act of aggression by Israel. That's extremely public. I mean, a lot of it has been through proxy wars in more recent history, but this was a very, very bold step, and to take responsibility for it, very, very bold. So the administration is now taking a stance trying to dismiss diplomacy and saying that they are more in favor of sanctions and military deterrence. But they are telling Israel very publicly, Trump has been saying to Netanyahu very publicly, hold back, because we might be somewhere close on an agreement in terms of dealing with these sanctions and getting them to come to a deal. We'll see where that goes. What is perhaps most concerning in all of this, well, before I get to that, let me say this. North Korea is doing what they usually do. They resume missile testing. The United States comes to talk to them. We talk about doing sanctions, and then, of course, they just come to the table. It's designed to get them to come to the table and have a conversation in exchange for what they might need, because North Korea is extremely isolated from the rest of the world, maybe with the exception of Russia and perhaps China. But mostly they're kind of kept away from most of the world. So that's what's going on right there. What's going on with in the South Asia region with India and Pakistan, I will say I think this has not been terrible with the administration, because, you know, the United States is now maintaining military aid or continuing to maintain military aid to India while calling for diplomatic dialogue. Of course, there was a whole attack that happened with India and Pakistan. There's always been tensions there. But there are people saying that the Trump administration is getting too close or too cozy with the Indian government, and they are ignoring human rights concerns, especially regarding Pakistan. Pakistan is getting minimal diplomatic attention, and this is straining relations. But I believe there was a ceasefire deal recently that they were able to strike as part of some sort of negotiation. So there is somewhat of a positive there. The one that I am most concerned about is Israel and Gaza. Now, whatever your stance is on the situation in Israel and Gaza, I will say this. The bloodshed has to end. The violence has to end. The suffering needs to end. The hostages need to come home, and those innocent children and families that are either dealing with starvation, poor health conditions, or their homes being leveled, devastated, decimated, that needs to end, and it needs to end now. Why I have a problem with the Trump administration is because of the fact that they are saying we should go in, take all the people out of Gaza that live there, that is their home, level the place, and pretty much build a what they call a freedom center of business and commerce. And when asked if people would be allowed to return, the answer was, oh, I don't think they're going to be allowed to return, because they're going to want to live in great places, these other places that we're going to send them. It's going to be better and more ideal for them to live there. That is ethnic cleansing. And whether it's just an idea or just rhetoric, there should be more of an outcry against that rhetoric, because that is not okay. That is a humanitarian crisis. And to talk about it as casually and as succinctly and without a shred of decency as the president of the United States, it is absolutely disgusting and atrocious. And we need to do better. We absolutely have to do better where this stuff is concerned. We should be calling for more accountability with our public officials. Of course, the United States has vetoed several UN resolutions that are critical of Israeli actions. Human rights organizations are warning about worsening crises with little U.S. intervention to date. Very little intervention to stop what is happening. And the stance is strengthening support among pro-Israel constituents, but it is alienating others in the international community. And I personally believe that it's okay to say that the people that live, that Israeli people should have a home, that they should have a place to exist. I perfectly think that's okay to say. But that should not be to the detriment of Palestinians, and vice versa. The creation of a safe environment, of a safe state, of a self-determined government for Palestinians should not be to the detriment of Israelis. And that's my position on the matter. The area has complex history. There's been a lot of land grabs, a lot of land changes, a lot of wars that have changed the scope of things. But what is not okay is to go in and now build settlements and encroach upon other people that are there and oppress them. That is not okay. What is also not okay is to call for the death of Israelis, to murder innocent people. That is also not okay. And for us to look at what is going on in that region, we have to acknowledge the complex history of what exists and has occurred there. And to say that to be part of the solution, we have to look at the whole instead of taking one side or the other side. Because for every side of something, there's a whole coin. And for us to have a comprehensive and informed discussion about it, we have to look at the whole. I'm going to split this up into two parts. When we come back next time, we are going to talk about not just the domestic economic impact of tariffs, labor shortages due to immigration policies, but we're also going to talk about lies that have been told, truths that have been told, and the narrative this administration has set, as well as the impact of Doge, Elon Musk, and the judiciary on policies, as well as this administration's seeming disregard and defiance of judges' orders and the rule of law. That's all the time that I have for today. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you even want to write in and give your particular feedback about this episode, go ahead. Go ahead and shoot me a DM or leave us a comment at _fullcirclepod on Instagram and at fullcirclepod on TikTok. That's all the time that I have for today. As I always love to say, have a great one from your favorite brother. We'll see y'all next time. Thanks.